All right, welcome back to Rebel Headquarters, TYT. You know who's joining me now? An old friend, one I haven't talked to in a while. Jonathan Kim. I mean, if you want a progressive movie review, where do you go? You go to Rethink Reviews and Jonathan Kim, right? Don't be ridiculous. All right, now this week we have District 9. Everybody's buzzing about District 9. So I want to see this review, and then we'll come back and talk to John about what it's really based on. All right, here you go.
MNU is trying to move the aliens for humanitarian reasons, but the real focus, just as it has been right from the beginning, is weapons. MNU is the second largest weapons manufacturer in the world. You know, we assumed that we'd be able to pick up the alien laser gun and just be able to shoot, but it didn't work like that. Because as we discovered, their technology is actually engineered in a biological manner and interacts exclusively with their DNA. So it just doesn't work with humans. And it's as simple as that.
This is basically a guy, and there's 3 humans here, basically trying to make a warning, you know? He's saying, I've killed 3 humans, watch out for me.
Whether it's Planet of the Apes or WALL-E, science fiction has retained a unique ability to address social and political issues in a way that few genres do. Maybe it's because when it's done well, science fiction allows us to witness a sometimes parallel, sometimes futuristic, but hopefully plausible alternate reality, where the normal rules are skewed in a way that forces us to confront what it is that truly makes us human. Neil Blomkamp's mind-blowing feature debut, District 9, is exactly this type of movie, exploring topics like racism, the weapons industry, lawless corporatism, and the plight of refugees, as it tells the story of growing tensions between humans and an alien race that's been imprisoned in a section of Johannesburg after their spaceship stalled out there 28 years prior. But District 9 is so creatively told, beautifully executed, and endlessly compelling that I consider it the best movie of the year so far. The busted spaceship contained about 1.5 million aliens who are commonly called prawns as a derogatory slur due to their crustacean-like features. While the aliens are clearly a more technologically advanced race, most of the aliens on the ship were low-level workers, and with their leaders dead, a lack of resources, and with no concept of private property in prawn culture, District 9 soon became a giant, violent, crime-infested shantytown. Nigerian gangs, the only humans who live in District 9, quickly started exploiting the aliens for their criminal enterprises. With fear and anger by humans of all races growing at these unwelcome visitors, District 9 was soon walled off from the human population. The job of policing and providing services for the aliens has not been taken up by a government, but by Multinational United, or MNU. MNU is basically a fascistic nightmare in the true sense of the word. Like if you combined a mercenary army like Blackwater, a giant weapons manufacturer like Lockheed Martin, and a giant conglomerate like General Electric into one enormous company that also performed governmental and bureaucratic services. And as recent history in Iraq, Afghanistan, and the US has shown, asking private corporations motivated solely by profits to perform governmental and humanitarian functions can be a recipe for disaster. The film's main character is a nebbish MNU bureaucrat named Vickis, played by Charlton Copley. Vickis has just been promoted by his father-in-law, who's the head of MNU, and has been placed in charge of the eviction of all aliens from District 9 so they can be moved to District 10, which is essentially a concentration camp far outside the city limits. Vickis is a true believer in the fairness and benevolence of MNU and its mission, but after being exposed to a mysterious substance, Vickis begins to learn the truth about District 9, what MNU is trying to do there, and what it really means to be alienated. One thing that makes District 9 so compelling is that it's largely presented in documentary and handheld style, complete with talking head and man-on-the-street interviews, footage from newscasts and security cameras, and cameras placed right in the action so blood and alien goo splatters on the camera lens. None of the characters are played by known actors, and with a mix of races, accents, and languages, combined with the fact that the movie was shot in an actual Johannesburg slum, almost every aspect of District 9 feels utterly real. That includes the aliens, their ship, and their advanced technology, all designed with loving care and attention to detail by Peter Jackson's company, Weta. Director and co-writer Neil Blomkamp has said that District 9 would not exist without his experience growing up in Johannesburg at the end of Apartheid, which he described as a, quote, racially charged powder keg city, an urban prison. But instead of invoking the oppression of blacks by whites, District 9 is about how humans of all races and social strata treat those who are perceived as inferior, whether they be refugees, migrant workers, the poor, or simply look different. District 9 is also dead on with its portrayal of the military-industrial complex, where companies like MNU, Raytheon, and Northrop Grumman are eager to unleash a new generation of devastating weapons on the world if it turns a profit. Above all else, District 9 is a wildly creative, clever, beautifully realized, utterly kick-ass movie. By turns a documentary, a horror film, a corporate thriller, and a summer action flick. But it's the intelligent, never preachy, never condescending, but always powerful social and political commentary that elevates District 9 to a modern classic. You heard me. I'm Jonathan Kim, and this is a Rethink Review.
All right, I heard you, and I'm ready to hear a little bit more about it. Now, I got to convince my wife to see this movie, okay? So when I go to tell her, all right, we got to see this, everybody thinks Jonathan Kim called it the best movie of the year. Now that's almost enough, right? But why is it so good? Is it the action? Is it the message? Is it the plot? What makes it stand out so much?
I think it's kind of all three. I mean, one thing that Neil Blomkamp, the director, said, he was like, I wasn't trying to beat people over the head about apartheid. He said, well, you know what? I grew up in Johannesburg. I saw this happen, and I wanted to set science fiction in Johannesburg based on kind of what he saw, and this was just his experience growing up. But I mean, in terms of it's not like a big crazy shoot 'em up, you know. There's a lot of kind of quiet parts, and what happens to Vicus, the main character, is really sort of a character study as he starts to kind of figure out, you know, I mean, learn the similarities and differences between the aliens and the people.
All right, and of course this is actually based largely on apartheid from back in the day. So where are some of the similarities?
Well, I mean, you probably saw in the ad campaign around where there were signs all over the place that said like on bus benches like human bench only, like report all aliens who are here. And under apartheid, blacks were not allowed to. Everything was segregated, like pools and cemeteries, and even things like bus benches. They weren't able to be there. And then all of what's happening in terms of in the movie, the eviction of all of these aliens, where basically in this case, MNU comes in and just says, you guys don't own the property. This area is too overcrowded. We're moving you. Like, it's not really your choice. You have to agree. Either we'll give you a tiny bit of money, way less than market value, or we're just going to force you out, and you can't really do anything about it. And a lot of the people didn't really understand what was going on. Well, a lot of the aliens don't understand what's actually happening.
Now, John, couldn't have happened in real life. Tell me that didn't happen in South Africa.
It actually did, in ways that are even crazier, kind of in some ways, than what happens in the movie. Because like what happened in South Africa, I mean, obviously, you know, there's always been discrimination, but they took away, you know, if you were Indian or black or mixed race, they took away their rights to vote. They took away their rights to own property, which meant that they could just say, hey, get out of here. You don't own this property, and had to move them around. And that's when they moved them to what's called Bantustans.
Now, originally there was not a District 9, but a District 6, right, in South Africa? And so what was the original District 6, and what happened to it?
Yeah, District 6, I mean, there was an article in Newsweek about it by Scott Johnson, and it was interesting. He was saying that, like, it was described as kind of being sort of like the French Quarter in New Orleans, where it was like a lot of activity and all these different races living together, and it was near a port, and like sailors would come in and, you know, kind of get drinks and everything, and it was apparently really nice. But then the government came in and said, nope, whites only, and started pushing people out, about 70,000, and either they bought the property for less than it was worth, or they just pushed them out. And I think they slowly moved them out to kind of fragment this happening, so it wasn't like big groups of people moving all at once. And families were getting split up. And actually, that was one thing in terms of whether you were considered colored or black. The government sort of decided it, and it was so arbitrary that it ended up being like parents were separated from their kids. Where it was like if the kids were like lighter skinned, they're like, okay, well you're colored, but your parents are darker, so they're black, so they get moved somewhere else.
How would that have made a difference? Like, how many different groups were there of races, and what happened to them?
Yeah, so what the National Party did was they said that South Africa isn't one nation; it's 13 different nations. There was the Indian nation, the mixed race nation, the white nation, and the black nations, because the Africans were split up into 10 different nations to basically diffuse their power. And then it was interesting, the South African government actually encouraged them to teach like their native languages and cultures, saying like, oh no, this is about, you know, your identity and, you know, and your specific tribe or whatever it is. But really what it did was it made those groups harder to sort of organize together, because they weren't actually talking with each other. They spoke different languages.
Divide and conquer. God, you know, there's a sick genius to it, you know, and of course, like you remember from the old days in Germany, of course, they tell them that they're going to move them out one at a time. Oh, don't worry, no, you probably won't be next until you're next.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, people are obviously going to hang on to their homes as long as they can, so they're going to hope against hope that it's not going to be them. But by that time, maybe your friends have gone and you don't know where they are anymore, or some family members are gone and you don't know where they're. So people were just plopped down in these Bantustans amongst strangers a lot of times.
And then it's almost like a prison, those places, because they only have 2 exits, right? One on the back and one on the front, and everybody's scrunched together. Nobody owns anything. And then then it took them, from what I read of the Newsweek article, John, it took them so much money to even get to work that they could barely sustain themselves.
Right. Yeah. They were. I mean, they were so far outside of the cities, and then their salaries weren't compensated for this extra travel. So everyone in the Bantustans just got deeper and deeper into poverty.
And so, of course, then the less money you have, the less power you have, the easier it is to push you around. It's a minor miracle reading all that stuff that they ever got beyond apartheid.
Yeah, it's kind of, I mean, when you read this stuff, it's really amazing what was actually done. And I mean, this idea that after sort of the independence of these nations was created, the white South African government said, well, you're no longer South African citizens. Therefore, you're essentially illegal immigrants or guest laborers, which meant that you had to have these passes. If you were black and working in a white area, you had to have these passes, which were nicknamed the dumb pass, meaning the dumb pass. And if you were caught without your pass, you could be arrested. You could be sent to some other Bantustan, whether it was where you were from or not. Families weren't allowed to live near you and everything, and it was really, really crazy.
You know, as you go through one oppression after another, I'm reminded of Rush Limbaugh, who a couple of months ago said on his radio program, oh yeah, they made a hero out of Nelson Mandela when he was just a communist, you know? And this is the kind of program they ran against the white government of South Africa. I don't remember what he was alluding to, but he just was like dismissive of how could we have ever fought apartheid when the good white government of South Africa was doing fine.
Right, and I mean, and Dick Cheney famously, I think it was in '86. In '86 he voted against calling for the release of Nelson Mandela, and it wasn't. And I think you'd probably hear like, well, it was accepted knowledge that the African National Congress was a terrorist organization. But that vote on the resolution was 245 to 177 in favor, but they didn't have the 2/3 majority to override Reagan's veto.
So what did Reagan veto?
Calling for the release of Nelson Mandela.
No, of course not. Why would you want to do that? Ronald Reagan is an American hero. And the release of Nelson Mandela, that terrorist? No, we got to veto that.
Because, I mean, like the African National Congress, I mean, there were bombings around like 200, I think, and I mean, what would be called terrorist acts, but what was the South African government doing? I mean, they were arresting people, they executed people, they were taking away all of their rights, but this is just like that's not terrorist, that's just what governments do.
Now, look, now we're going to get really controversial, because I got to ask you, I mean, look, it's all leading to the question, I didn't mean to ask this question, but as we're having this conversation, the obvious question is, well, what the fuck would you do?
Exactly.
Right? And are there current day parallels? You know there are, right? It's not quite as bad as this.
You could say Palestine.
No. We have had this discussion, okay? And now Israel is building more settlements today, you know, as we speak. Now, here's the thing. When the government does something, it's never considered terrorism. It's never considered what it is, state violence. When they come to your land, they build their own property on it, or they move you around, as you know, has happened here, has happened over there. That's not violence. Now, if you resist, they'll shoot you in the head, right? But that's not violence. Now, if you strike back with violence, then you're a terrorist. Now, I'm not saying you should strike back with violence. It's not. Look at what Nelson Mandela did. It's a perfect example. He didn't use violence ultimately, and ultimately his campaign was unbelievably successful using peaceful means. So I would encourage that. But at the same time, when we're having conversations to say one side, the oppressed side, are the evil guys, okay, and the oppressors, no, they never did anything wrong, right? What violence? Violence? We don't use any violence. What are you talking about?
Yeah, like when you read about all these laws, I mean, like you're saying, like, it's not considered terrorism because they passed laws. There was the Group Areas Act, which said that you could basically segregate everyone and kick them off their land. The Separate Amenities Act, which said that, oh, we're gonna have separate schools and stuff like that. But of course, the African schools sucked. A student got 1/10 the amount of money for their education than a white student did. But because there are laws that got passed that have nice sounding names, it's just not considered that bad.
Well, they passed laws, and I'm sure all those guys that were in those areas got to vote on it, right?
No.
Oh, they didn't. Oh, that's funny how that works. But let's end on a cheery note. I hear Asians weren't that bad off in South Africa.
Well, yes. With Asians, there was kind of, I mean, all these things with the different races were all, as I said, kind of like schizo about how they classified who. And, a lot of Chinese came into South Africa to work in the mines, like in the 19th century. And those were descendants of them were considered other Asian or non-white. So they were basically treated like all the other non-whites. But if you were from Taiwan, South Korea, or Japan, and South Africa had diplomatic and economic relations with them, you were considered an honorary white.
Oh, are they not merciful? Are they not merciful?
Isn't that what we all want?
I'm going to use that from now on. Congratulations, you are an honorary white. All right, John, that's a great review. And based on your review, I will definitely see it this weekend.
Awesome.
All right, thanks. We'll be right back, Young Turks.